Hello again to yet another Amiibo related video on this ever so adored channel of mine. For some reason, there's a large split between the Amiibo community's vision of a quote-unquote perfect Amiibo. You see, this was quite evident within my video I posted back a week ago, titled The Top 5 Best and Worst Amiibo Functions of All Time, link in the description for those who are curious. In this video, I went over what I personally believe to be, well, the best and worst functions Amiibo have had in games upon their creation, ranging from me praising amiibos such as the Shovel Knight amiibo, and being less kind to something like the Shadow Mewtwo amiibo card. The video's reception was mostly positive too, with some critiques having to do with research errors and misunderstandings with various diehard fans of the franchises the amiibo belong to, along with the overall division of opinions with video pics. And obviously I accept all these and I strive to do better in future videos. Now, if everything seemed hunky-dory with the whole video, where am I trying to get at exactly? Well, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there seems to be a massive gap between amiibo preferences in general. In this video I made, it was perfectly expressed amongst everyone in the comments section of the video. The split goes along the lines of what two different kinds of people in the amiibo community happen to envision their preferences on how amiibo should be marketed. This brings me to the creation of this video and topic. Thanks to this little Civil War-like divide. Don't actually go to war though, keep in mind you just be fighting over amiibo, plastic figures. Don't be that guy who fought over peanuts in a bar in the forgotten Clint Eastwood classic Any Which Way But Loose. Today's video will be discussing the ethical principles and thought processes behind what an average amiibo fan believes to be the determining factor of what makes an amiibo worth buying. Now obviously before you go into the video expecting me to immediately disagree with you on something, keep in mind that this video is all my opinion, and that I have every right to express my opinion online. Wait a minute. That also means you guys have the freedom to dislike the video if you disagree. This is giving me a brain tumor. With all that being disclaimed and said, and with all this information gathered into one, let's get into the topic of choice. So finally, here is what I'm talking about with the aforementioned split in the amiibo community's preferences. In one interpretation, you have one amiibo collector that believes that amiibo should offer more in terms of content, reasoning that amiibo don't offer nearly as much as they should for the $12 they spent on the amiibo content-wise. But also on the other hand, you have amiibo fans that think having a lot of content packed into amiibos is unfair to them, and that Nintendo is just encouraging nothing more than overpriced paywalls. Now, I am 100% aware that no amiibo will be perfect in everyone's eyes, and that everyone will be bound to be separated by differentiating opinions of some kind. However, in my eyes, I believe that there is a glaring middle ground to this scenario. You see, what most people seem to miss in my amiibo functions video, for example, is that my ethic goes along the lines of this. I certainly do not encourage the lack of content or paywalls at all of any kind. What I do believe in, though, is that amiibo should offer more content and enough content to at least be worth their money. The whole time in my video, the prime focus was to educate those who weren't necessarily hardcore fans of any kind, or to satisfy any group in specific, but to give and educate the audience on what amiibo functions were worth and not worth buying to anybody. What I mean by this, for example, instead of having something as simple as getting a couple of costume loot boxes with whatever amiibo you get, I personally believe that amiibos should be much more appealing functionality-wise if it gave you something like 7 or so costume loot boxes and 2 extra amiibo exclusive bonus levels that are within rational worth and not just paywall DLC. Now, the reason I believe something like this is fair to everybody is because it's simply offering more to anybody who buys it, possibly increasing sales and satisfying the amiibo fans that want more content. And due to being reasonable amiibo exclusive content, it satisfies the amiibo fans that hate having to suffer the paywall problem. Most importantly to my requests of fair amiibo content, this amiibo content should especially strive to be fair to all people who can't or don't want to buy those amiibo, depending on the game of course. So in the end, basically my hopes are that nobody complains about paywalls or lack of content. This is what I believe should be the determining factor of what makes amiibo actually worth its price tag. Now, some people are going to point fingers at me for having an unreasonable and unfair opinion, and I understand that. This is where the bias segment of the video comes into play, however, with the right and wrong of amiibo worthiness. Now, believe it or not, what I just said, aside from the obvious bias leaning with the statement itself, it's not supposed to be biased towards or with any side an amiibo fan or collector has. You see, much of what most people base their amiibo purchasing endeavors on is if they already like that series, like the Kirby series for example. A Kirby fanboy is naturally going to buy a Kirby series amiibo most of the time. They love the series, so obviously most fans will go out of their way to buy an amiibo that goes along with that franchise, no matter what price tag. Or, even on the other hand, fans will rage and boycott the amiibo if it seems like Nintendo is ripping their fans off. Look, the point I'm trying to get here is that preference and bias seem to control and influence decision making and rational thought over what an amiibo fan will go after. Now, bias in liking a game series isn't inherently a bad thing necessarily, and it's certainly not to be looked down on either, and not everybody uses bias as a means to their own decision making. However, what I do think is a problem here is when the bias gets in the way of rationality of making the decision to purchase the amiibo. Heavy bias can result in creating conflict with someone or anyone else of a different look at things. I mean, you could possibly already be looking at me right now through the video screen shaking your head of disapproval over my strange opinions, but heavy bias can also result in you buying an amiibo with mediocre content standards, but still end up buying it despite being aware of that mediocre content, all because of your own love for the series and the figure. Along with just wanting the figure itself, many amiibo collectors defend their amiibo based on their sentimental value towards the series and the amiibo they have. However, there actually seems to be a major difference in the way someone defends their amiibo. This lies under whether someone gives and gets you an amiibo versus you yourself going out and getting the amiibo you want. Why this is so big for someone's bias for an amiibo they like is simply because depending on the two outcomes, it determines the level of which you go out of your way to defend these amiibo to justify your adoration for your favorite amiibo. Psychologically, most people will tend to defend their amiibo more fiercely if they themselves went out of their way to earn the hard cash to buy it themselves. Make sense? Then if they were to receive a gift from somebody else. Even deeper as a result, it influences a person that bought the amiibo to find reasons as to why their purchase was justified, even if there are glaring negative aspects to it. If someone were to give you an amiibo for free and you didn't put the work into the amiibo, the odds of someone truthfully defending the amiibo that they now have is less than that if they were to spend the money on it themselves, especially if they worked hard for it and if the amiibo is rare and goes for a lot of money. Most don't make this apparent when a gift like an amiibo is given to them because of sentimental value and how it's inherently the more polite thing to do. Not everyone is the same mentally, keep in mind, so my results, statistics, and research here on mental bias and preference are certainly not 100%, but it's certainly worth thinking about and processing. Now that I've talked about the perception of people towards functionality worth, let's go and address what many consider the primary reason for buying their amiibo. Simply the fact that amiibo are, quote, just collectible figures that look good on your shelf with an additional bonus in whatever game they're compatible with. This is why in previous videos I've been making jokes about how amiibo are not toys, even though that's exactly what they really are. Yet another elephant in the room inside this hotel worth of rooms is that not everybody wants to collect for these amiibo, but to enjoy using them too, even whilst collecting for them. Now, despite a huge chunk of the amiibo community being adults and teenagers, a lot of people that like amiibo also happen to be kids. That's right, just like Skylanders, despite the series being a different story, these toys to life have a demographic of kids that treat these plastic figures as toys. Gee, it isn't like these are exclusive vinyl figures or anything. The next point I'm trying to highlight here though, jokes aside, is that amiibo aren't just marketed towards us diehard collectors, but to youngsters too. Now, what am I trying to bring up here? Is that amiibo are not solely meant for sitting on a shelf to model, but were also designed for usage in game too. So to say that the amiibo features are just an added bonus to the figure is completely wrong, because as I stated prior, amiibo are also meant for kids as well, thus meant to be played with and used. All the more reason to support my solution for a middle ground in amiibo content standards, but as usual you don't have to believe in my ethics, as I'm not forcing you viewers to believe in such. And yet another thing I feel that's important to bring up towards the people that claim amiibo are solely meant for being primarily collectible figures is that it's pretty common for people to say that amiibo are worth the $12 for the often heavily detailed figures alone, even despite some amiibo having mediocre in-game features and content. Now I admit that this is a pretty decent claim, if it wasn't for one glaring flaw. Even though the majority of amiibo figurines are heavily well done with gorgeous and awesome detail, that doesn't mean every amiibo design is inherently perfect. With the exception of some opinions and preferences, there do exist some pretty ugly and even lazy designs attributed with some figures. I mean, there's even amiibo that aren't even figures at all, but are just mere cards. That's a completely different breed of amiibo though, and I'll probably go over that in a future video. Future video foreshadowing, anyone? So whilst many amiibo collectors and fans justify their worth on amiibo based on figure designs, this can't possibly be the overall case, as I mentioned prior to the claim's flaws. For the trillionth time, however, this is solely my preference on amiibo perfection and counterclaims, so you still have every right to make counterclaims and hold different beliefs despite of all these things. Please don't destroy the dislike button. I mean, come on guys, the dislike button's under 18. In the end, when it all comes down to it, how someone determines an amiibo being worth its buy is all within the individual tastes. There's no definitive answer to opinions, and this video is simply just me suggesting a bunch of possible ways to determine for someone that is really unsure about purchasing an amiibo. Now, don't let my ideas take over your life. Just maybe take them into consideration next time you go out and shop for amiibo. And maybe if you still like the amiibo despite everything I've said, go for it. You do you. Nobody's stopping you from getting what you love. My beliefs and worths are all just attempts to counter claims to quell the arguments over what amiibo should be perfect at in each of our own eyes. Just my own personal claims and beliefs shed over in video form. Most importantly though, did you like the video or fairly agree with my statements or even have counterclaims or ideologies by chance? I mean, the like button is over 18 on the other hand. Who knows? I kind of like this study a lot, so maybe I'll do more episodes on amiibo ethics in the future. I'm the Amiibo Critic. Now remember it so you don't have to. Wait a minute, that sounds familiar. I hope I don't get sued for plagiarism here. Wait, hey! This isn't funny! You're messing with the wrong guy!